Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic signature show, period. I'm Mike, the Sig Slayer, chilling with Mark, the honorable villain. What up, my man?
What's up, Mike? We have one of the most classic creators in the game, man. This guy is a legend in many mythos. Let him know who we got, Mike.
Today, we have legendary comic artist Joe Staton with us. But before we chat with Joe, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right, our next guest is the co-creator of the Huntress, the Omega Man, E-Man. But if you're a real Green Lantern fan, you know this man provided the first visuals for Kilowog, Nekron, Salak, Arisia, and many more. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you the one and only Joe Staton. How you doing, Joe?
Doing okay. Good to see you.
Oh man, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today on Sig Slayers. We're going to just dive right on in. We have a lot of questions to ask you. Okay, so Joe, since it's your first time joining us, we like to get your comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comic?
Well, my origin story is I always wanted to draw comics, never quite made the connection, but it turned out that I got married one day in, I think, 71, and we were very broke. We didn't have much range of where we're heading for a honeymoon, and Hillary, my wife, was teaching. She had to get back to teaching, but we were leaving New York City and going to Mystic, Connecticut. And if you remember Charlton Comics and Derby, Connecticut, that was between New York and Mystic. So I had my samples, always have my samples, and we stopped. I think I called ahead for a interview, but maybe I just showed up. Maybe, but at any rate, Sal Gentili, who was the editor, and his assistant editor, George Wildman, they had me in, and they decided to give me a shot. So,
do you remember your first title?
Well, apparently, I'm not sure. I don't remember this real good, but apparently I did a 3-page romance tryout. And I do remember I got a horror tryout, The Curse of the Hanging Man. So those were my first 2 shots. And they liked the Hanging Man, the horror stuff. They had a very nice Ditko cover on the comic when it came out, but they didn't think I was slick enough to do the romance stuff. So, but I was very happy with doing the horror stuff.
Okay, so you mentioned Charlton Comics, perfect segue. We know that later on DC would acquire Charlton Comics, but talking to someone, we never actually interviewed someone that actually worked at Charlton while it was operating. So could you share a little bit about your experience working at Charlton?
Well, Charlton was always the bottom of the barrel. So people would work at Charlton basically just to work in comics. They didn't pay very much, but since they didn't pay much, they didn't give you much trouble. They were kind of happy to have whatever you came in, and it was an odd operation. The presses and the writers and the colorist and the whole operation was in one huge big flat building. So the comics, you could come in, you could turn in a script, draw it there, turn it on, and be shot. Be printed, and it went out and never had to see the light of day.
Oh, wow. All in house, all in there.
All in there. Yeah, and they had a a couple of semis, I think, with the Charlton logo on them on the side, so that they would leave the building with the Charlton logo also.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Tell us about the longevity of your character, E-Man. We know it started out with Charlton, but you've carried him around different publishers across the decades.
Oh yeah, definitely. E-Man started at Charlton. That was with my buddy Nick Cuddy, who after Sal retired, George Wildman was the main editor, and he hired Nick Cuddy to be his assistant. And Nick had been one of Wally Wood's assistants. And when Charlton decided to give Nick a shot at creating his own superhero, Nick called me and told me his idea, and we between us we decided to go with E-Man. And E-Man had a following. He still has a following, but he never had like a major success. So I think the E-Man actually lasted at Charlton 10 issues, I think, and we thought that was the end of it. But in the 80s, I was hired to do art, and the art director for First Comics was a startup in the 80s. That was the big coming of small publishers, indies, was in the 80s. And at Charlton, Mike Gold was the editor, and Mike decided that at first, right, yes. Things run together here. Mike was the editor at first, and he decided that people remembered E-Man, so I should bring E-Man back. And at that point, Charlton still owned E-Man, but first put up the money and the legal operation to get E-Man back from Charlton, so that it would come to First. It was very odd setup, but we had a entertainment lawyer by the name of George Bullwinkle, honestly, and he had a very good name in Chicago. So George Bullwinkle set it up so that the rights would come to First, and I would share in that. So and we did, I think at First, I think we did 21 issues, something like that. The trouble is, when we got E-Man from Charlton, we couldn't get Nick because Nick was working at DC at the time, and DC was not happy to see people working on their staff doing things for other publishers at the same time. So they wouldn't release Nick to do the writing until very close to the end of E-Man's run at First.
Let's move over to another publisher. How was Roy Thomas instrumental to your involvement at Marvel?
Basically, Roy was instrumental because he hired me.
Yeah.
He called up one day out of the blue. I had no idea. I had taken my samples up to Marvel several times, but I really had no idea that I was on the list to be called. But Roy called up out of the blue one day and talked to me for a while, and told me who he was, what they were doing, and he says, "Oh, would you like to ink the Avengers?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that's really good because it's on its way, and you're late." Now, the funny thing about this is that I saw Roy at I guess at Heroes Con. I usually see Roy at Heroes. And I asked him, Roy, what was this about? Why did you call me? Was I next on the list? And Roy says, Joe, I have no memory of ever calling you. So so he was working his way down the list. He didn't remember who he was calling next, but I was next to the list. So I was very, very pleased that Roy called me.
And so you talked about inking those Avengers issues with Sal Buscema.
Yep.
What were some of the challenges you faced as a young inker?
Well, a lot of it was just getting the feel of all the different characters. There's so many different characters, so many different costumes at Marvel, and I knew a lot of them, but certainly not all of them. And the first issue I came in on kind of threw me into the middle of it with Agatha Harkness and Crimson Witch. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah.
But one thing that's kind of a footnote is that we had moved upstate a bit. We were originally in Brooklyn. We moved up into Ulster County, and we were near Joe Sennett, and Joe knew all of the Marvel stuff. So I had been over to see Joe, and Joe and his wife Betty were really nice, great people. Show us around, tell us what was going on, and everybody who does Marvel art knows Kirby Krackle. You know Kirby Krackle?
Yeah.
Right.
All of the I think it's called Escaping Energy. That's a Kirby.
Yeah.
And when I saw Joe, he said, well, is there anything you want to do with that? Well, I said, okay, how do you do Kirby Krackles? And I had been trying to do it with a brush, straight with a brush. And Joe said, nope. You do it with speedball pens, the same ones you do the lettering. You make big floppy black spots with a speedball, a B point that makes a round spot. So that's how you did Kirby Krackle. So I was very pleased that the first Avengers issue that I did just had Kirby Krackles all over it. So I was in the middle of this Kirby thing, but Joe Sennett had showed me how to do it, and I was up to speed on that.
Trade secret.
Amazing. Moving on, shifting to Green Lantern at DC. I mean, you had a who's who of writers that you worked with: Steve Englehart, Len Wein, Marv Wolfman. But we want to know, what was the collaborative process like during your early days at DC, building up the mythos with Green Lantern?
Oh, golly. I've worked with a lot of people on Green Lantern, a lot of good ones. That the process was just, you could come up with aliens from all directions, and that was the process with those. Marv Wolfman would think through these guys and what they would actually be doing. We did stuff with Len, and then and of course Steve Englehart, when we did the rebooted the Green Lantern as the Green Lantern Corps.
Right. Steve
had a shot at like introducing a whole new bunch of Green Lanterns, and he was very creative, but he didn't give me a lot of direction. Like for Kilowog, it's but here's the story. He's a big guy, and he's really got a heart of gold, but you can't see it because he's so big and scary. So that was what I had for Kilowog. So I took off of that and came up with my version of what a guy like that would look like. I always tell people that he was actually based on Ernest Borgnine, but if you remember him, And we had other characters. Aricio was based on a little blonde woman on, I think, on Dallas. We usually had some basis of an actor to take off from, have a character with a face or personality that matches what would go into the story. So that's so when we were reworking the Green Lanterns, that's when I really had a chance to get into it and work out different designs and different characters, and of course that's when we completely rebooted Guy Gardner, and Guy became like the standout. That was the truly irritating Green Lantern. But he was based on an actor, Timm Pigott-Smith, a British actor of all people. But we designed a new look for a Green Lantern that never looked like Guy before. So when you're working with the characters, with the science fiction and the space characters, there's a lot of room to expand and get into them, and I always really enjoyed getting into those.
We're gonna elevate that question real quick, Mark. We interviewed Steve Englehart a couple months ago, and he feels strongly that he created Guy Gardner just based on the fact that he was only in one issue of Green Lantern back in the Silver Age during the Gil Kane era. What are your thoughts on Guy Gardner? Do you feel like you guys actually made Guy Gardner as we know it today?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. The modern conception of Guy Gardner is strictly a creation of Steve Englehart, and with design work and 2 bits from me. That's where Guy came from. If Guy had been written pretty much into a dead end in previous continuities, there was nothing happening with. And actually, as I recall the story, Dick Giordano asked Steve, he said, there's this character, there's an extra Green Lantern, there's doing nothing with him. Can you reconceive something for Guy Gardner and recreate this character? So we think we have a pretty good claim to being the creators of the character that people know as Guy Gardner.
Awesome. Now I want to get to a kind of an obscure character, Nekron. What was the idea behind Nekron when you were creating him? And did you get to see what he eventually became during the Blackest Night era around about a decade ago? He showed up in the mini series, right? Yes.
Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. Yeah.
That was basic. I think all of that originally came from Mike Barr. He was the writer, the plotter. So he originally came from Mike, and the idea that he was really the embodiment of death, kind of an unpleasant death. So we had a pretty bony character with huge eyes, very dead eyes, pulling like souls from Green Lanterns. It was pretty scary character. But he originally was a creation of Mike Barr, my buddy Mike, and the original design was mine, and I got him as scary and nihilistic as I could. And about to the other question, I did see the developed version that came back around, which wasn't I it wasn't a look that I would have gone for. So, at least he's still around.
Joe, I want to ask you this question. You've worked for 30 plus publishers. That means no one is more qualified than you to talk about the comic book business. From your experience, what is the most rewarding thing about making comics, and what's the most challenging?
Well, I think the most rewarding thing is either working with characters that you grew up with, that you really have looked forward to work with, and also working with your own characters. So if I would be working with Green Lanterns, I came to them. I loved all the Julie Schwartz science fiction, so that was a great mix. But I guess the thing that I will always be most remembered for is E-Man with Nick Cuddy, and that was our own characters. And Nick had his ideas exactly what he wanted, and he was right. And but he had left me enough room to get my feeling for the characters in there. So we worked back and forth, and that was really a nice thing when you were not getting much direction from management, and they were just letting us develop whatever we wanted to.
Joe, you did a sizable amount of adaptations from the Bruce Timm, Paul Dini universe, World's Finest, Batman Beyond, Batman and Robin Adventures. How did you get assigned to that corner of DC?
Well, I've always been drawn to that cartoony look, especially the Bruce Timm universe. It seems like it was waiting for me. That it was there, and there was one time I was going down the hall at DC, and Mike Carlin wanted somebody to draw an animated Superman annual, and he called me in from the hall and says, "Joe, you can draw this, can't you? You can draw cartoony stuff." And then he stopped and he said, "Of course you can. You can't help yourself. You have to do this stuff." So I kind of came. It was one that also felt like it was waiting for me. The Bruce Timm universe was waiting for me, just like the Green Lanterns were. It was one that fit me very well.
And then here we go, Scooby-Doo. You're drawing dozens of issues of Scooby-Doo. I'm a big Scooby-Doo fan. My take on it, you just gave us Mike Carlin's take. My take is that you have a versatility as an artist, because you still have to adapt to all these different IPs. And so I wanted you to speak on your versatility as an artist.
Scooby-Doo is like everything that kind of falls my way. I think I had just lost Guy Gardner. I wasn't doing Guy Gardner anymore, but I had been in to see Marty Pasco, who was the head of licensing books at that time, and Brandon was editor. She was passing Scooby-Doo assignments around the office, and who wants to do Scooby-Doo? And I had really no idea who Scooby-Doo was. I mean, I knew who Scooby-Doo was, but I didn't have a real good grip on it. But she gave me a Scooby assignment, and I warmed up to it, and she approved it, and I kind of. She says I was the only Scooby-Doo artist that was actually turning in the stories on time, so she had to give me more. But I'm sure that's not true, because Ernie Cologne was turning them in on time all the time. So, but it just kind of came my way, and I warmed up to Scooby, and strangely enough, I went to picking up my first Scooby script, and I thought it was one story, and I then did 10 years of drawing Scooby. I think Hillary and I figured out one time that I had Scooby art in at least 100 issues of Scooby-Doo. So I was got to be very comfortable with Scooby. Yeah.
I think that's around where we counted. Joe, we've yet to talk to a syndicated cartoonist. Can you tell us a little bit about your run on the Harvey Award-winning Dick Tracy comic strip?
Well, I said I have always wanted to draw comics, and the first comic that took my attention, which seemed to be when I was 3 years old, was the Dick Tracy strip in the newspapers. So as long as I was around drawing, I was trying to pick up that Chester Gould look. And I always wanted to do Tracy, wanted to do something in the, I guess you'd say, the Dick Tracy universe, the Gould universe. But sometimes there would be rumors that the strip would be opening up, and it never did really. But my buddy Mike Curtis, who, if you remember the Memphis comics shows years back, Mike Curtis was one of the organizers and one of the helpers on that, and would like show Kirk Allen around. And but I knew Mike from the shows, and we decided at one time that we should do our own version of Tracy. Not to infringe on anybody's copyrights. We shouldn't have done that. Turns out that was entirely illegal. But we were doing a continuity for a few weeks in a Tracy homage site. We had somebody put it up, and the people at the Trib were aware of what we were doing. They weren't doing anything to stop us. Strip opened up briefly, and the people at the Trib said, well, these guys are already drawing Tracy, so let's see if they would like to do it for real. And we did. We did want to do it for real, and they got us on the strip. And what we had done on our homage site turned out to be, I think, was our first couple of months of what went into the newspaper strips. We fell into that, and we were ready to go.
Did you won a Harvey Award? What was that like? Being recognized for that, especially you going way back with Dick Tracy as a fan.
Yeah, it was very nice, and for Mike too. He was such a Tracy fan and went way back. We were very, very pleased to get our Harveys for Tracy.
Joe, we're on our very last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming appearances? Any projects that are coming up? Anything you're working on right now?
Well, one thing I'd like to plug is there's a tribute to the Indies characters of the 80s. And like I was saying before, the 80s were the big time for the small publishers. And this is tribute to the legends of the 80s. There's going to be, I think there's about 20 different people doing, it's all words, prose about the characters. There'll be John Ostrander doing Grimjack, and Mike Grohl doing John Sable. There'll be Megaton Men, and there's a bunch of them, and they wanted me to be a part of it, and seemed like doing a superhero was a little bit beyond me, but we had the sidekick character, Michael Mauser, the the short and unhealthy detective. So I actually teamed up with my wife, Hillary, who's a professional writer in her own right, and we bounced off some ideas for Michael Mauser. So we have a Michael Mauser detective story that takes place in the 80s. I'm expecting it sometime in the summer.
Got it. Joe, thank you so much for joining us, man. This is great. Especially it's kind of like bookend after interviewing Steve Englehart and interviewing you, and you guys feel the same way about Guy Gardner. I love it.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, thank you so much. And you always have a home here on the Sig Slayers station, so thank you. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Joe Staton. We are out. Peace. Sig Slayers.